Welcome back. The absence of a legal framework to regulate the production of eucalyptus veneers has thrown the country into the throes of an environmental dilemma between growing the 15 billion trees to attain 30% tree cover by 2032 or feed an insatiable international demand for the timber that was introduced in the country to power the steam engine-run railway, mostly for its rapid growth rate. Tonight's NTV's science and health reporter Bridget Singana reveals the ongoing sale of eucalyptus trees to veneer processing industries despite an ongoing ban, and the impact of the loss of 6 million trees due to unregulated harvesting.
It's been 3 months since we exposed the rampant harvesting of immature eucalyptus trees to be sold to Chinese investors who are processing veneers for export to China. Our expose led to the Ministry of Environment banning the veneer exports, but our sources tell us that despite the ban on exports, activities have been going on at 2 veneer processing companies that we had previously visited in our earlier report. To conceal our identity, we posed as farmers willing to sell eucalyptus trees. We visited the 2 factories but were turned away on account that our visit was falling on a weekend. We then staged calls to the managers of the companies we had visited, and while one had shut down due to technical challenges,
nilikuwa nauliza bado mnachukua miti?
Miti sasa imesimamishwa.
Mpaka lini?
Hatujajua juu machine bado iko na issue ya kuwa sawa. Ikiwa sawa ndio wanaweza communicate. Unajua ina rely na maintenance team yetu, na ni kama kuna customer but wanatafuta na wajapata.
Okay.
But once imekuwa sawa. Ziko wapi miti?
Hapa nini Olkalau?
Olkalau. Once imekuwa sawa tutaresume tu ina maneno.
Okay. No.
The other was open for business.
Kwa mbali kwa sababu natoka pande ya Olkalau.
Olkalau.
Nyandarua sasa. Nilikuwa nataka nijue ndo sasa nisibahatishe ati nitaenda na miti huko nikose. Wewe uko sure tu nikienda nitapata watachukua?
Sasa itabidi waje niongee na mtu hapo hivyo. Juu nimesahau hiyo nini urefu, lakini mimi najua circumference ni 12 to 50 centimeters, lakini waje ndaulizia hiyo kwa urefu kidogo.
Bado wanaendelea kukata na machine inafanya kazi?
Machine inafanya kazi kabisa.
So si ati unajua huku Nyandarua kuna nyingine imeharibika, sasa ndo maana nilikuwa natafuta.
Hapo iko sawa, hata miti ndo ilikuwa imekosa kidogo.
Our findings come in the wake of a careful report to the Departmental Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining that an estimated 6 million trees have been cut to process veneers in the country. I'm standing inside Kenya's only natural catalogue of living exotic trees, and these are trees that are not indigenously found here in Kenya, but were brought in by the colonialists to test if they would adapt to Kenya's climate. We did a story on the eucalyptus veneers a while back, and this is why we're here, because Carefree has given out recommendations on how the country can recover from the loss of more than 6 million trees in 6 months. This tree here, I'm being told, is more than 50 years old and possibly could be over 100 years old.
Because of what is happening in our environment.
Dr. Jane Njuguna, the acting CEO at the Kenya Forestry Research Institute, was tasked with furnishing the Parliamentary Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining with the scientific data on how many trees were felled and what the farmers made in the aftermath. Carefree estimates that farmers only made 642 million shillings from selling their immature trees for processing, compared with the projected 8.6 billion shillings they would have made had the trees matured to about 10 to 15 years old. And the value was to rise further to more than 11 billion shillings had the trees matured to 20 to 25 years of age.
For having grown a tree to 5-6 years, only to get something less than 100 shillings, truly it is not worth the value. For me, if I was a farmer and then I have to keep something for 6 years to get 100 shillings, which is even less than a bunch of bananas, it's a serious loss. Knowing that I've invested in this process every day, every month, I've invested my emotions and expectations only to get 100 shillings at the end of it. Really, it is not a good type of business. So what we are advising is that veneer can be produced, but if farmers can be encouraged and sensitized to keep the trees a little bit longer, you would reduce the amount of waste that was experienced. Because we realized that in the process of processing for veneer, there was 46% loss of material. And that material is not being used anywhere. It is being kept just in a big field, and therefore, it forms like a mountain. We need to know that eucalyptus in itself produces chemical products. And the longer we keep it there, it will have long-term effect on the area where it is kept. And also, in terms of degradation, it takes long to degrade. The chemicals will also get into the soils and the water system. So we find that that particular area or those areas will not be useful in the long term.
According to Dr. Njuguna, the immediate impact of the loss of tree cover is already being felt, and it will take the country nearly a decade to recover.
They were providing other environmental goods and services, and especially the weed break, also the shade and all that. So if there was somebody who had planted the trees along the boundary or near a house, and suddenly you find that the tree is not there, there's too much wind that is coming to your compound, or too much wind that is now blowing. In terms of wind erosion, you find more dust blowing in the environment. We'll have shortage of timber in the long term, because our government is talking about affordable housing. And these are 6 million trees that have gone. So we expect a shortage of some products from eucalyptus in these areas. We have gone back to square zero, waiting for the sprouts. And by the time they come to that level of exploitation in another 6 years, and we are saying if they give it another 3-4 years, we are giving it a blank period of 10 years. And that is enormous. In terms of the environment, that's an impact that will be felt.
Dr. Njuguna believes that the lack of a law governing the exploitation of young farmed eucalyptus trees could be fueling the destruction of the trees under the guise of fair business practices.
There are no guidelines on when to produce trees for veneer or when to produce trees for the various poles and posts. People just do as they wish. At the farm level, we don't have enforcement on how to even control what farmers do. We have institutions that are supposed to do that. But if you look at the Kenya Forest Service, mandate of the Kenya Forest Service is public forest. So at the farm level, we don't have institutions that can guide or even control what farmers can do. That if you are growing this for veneer, this is what you must do. And you must not sell it below this age. Most likely you would be seeing gazettement of an import and export regulation, so that it guides how do you go about if you're interested in doing such a trade. Because by and large, we would also want to leave our landscape very stable and balanced, and at the same time also be able to use those same resources to engineer economic transformation, especially at the grassroots, where many farmers, and I know the numbers are there, that many farmers, of course, are going into the whole issue of eucalyptus growing.
Cypress, predominantly, pine, and eucalyptus.
Sentiments that resonate with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers and the Environment Institute of Kenya.
We're doing about 15 million trees, and we started about 2 years ago. So when about 40% of those are cut in 6 months, as private sector, you ask yourself, is this worth it? Or because it seems that we are speaking at cross purposes, private sector and government, but private sector is committed to pushing the desert back. Forestry is not like other sectors of the economy. If you get it wrong, you're talking 30, 40, 50 years. If we are not careful, we will bequeath to our children a desert. You know, people always forget in Ghana that Sahara, the desert, was once a forest.
The Ministry of Environment and the Forestry Department are trying very hard to commercialize forestry. We need to make sense and value out of the forest that we have. And that can be achieved if we have a proper database of specific species, also establishing complementing species. If we have overdone eucalyptus, what is the alternative? So that before we talk about anything sustainability, we need to know our inputs and our outputs, the maturity periods, so that we can have a guided kind of an harvesting schedule. We need a quota, basically, introduced based on that assessment.
Of concern to the local timber manufacturers is how they can be protected against the wood shortages anticipated with the rapid cutting of the eucalyptus trees.
If the tree had been allowed to get into a later bordering stage, as per maturity guidelines issued by the government, they definitely would be looking at furniture jobs, would be looking at firewood jobs, would be looking at MDF jobs, posts jobs, electricity poles jobs, work for treatment plants for both the fencing posts and that, work for people who, loggers, sawmillers, who cut that, the Juakali guys on Gong Road who are doing furniture. So it's an entire ecosystem that without thought was just rubbished. It's very unfortunate that proper thought, proper planning, proper strategy, synergy, so that this can give value to the country. Because it makes no sense sending a scarce raw material to China for them to make a product, to bring it back and sell it to us at duty. It makes no sense. Unless you are Chinese or Indian, it makes no sense for a Kenyan to do it.
The head of public service, I wrote to the AG and I said...
But Environment Cabinet Secretary Aden Duale maintains that no eucalyptus veneer has been exported from the 16 veneer industries spread across 10 counties.
The cutting of eucalyptus and the exportation of veneer, the raw material from it, was not happening in our public forest. It was happening within the private and individual farmers. As long as I am the Minister for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, there will be no exportation of raw timber. Let me even put it. Veneer is one of the timber, but raw timber. We are doing a policy which is completely now done on the growing and the usage of veneer or eucalyptus, okay? Which I'll take to the cabinet, and if adopted, then goes to Parliament.
According to Duale, only 9 out of the 16 processors have been given a grace period to export the stock in their warehouses, and the government is now looking at having the entire value chain of the veneers being exhausted locally.
Now, when I suspended, there was now a hue and cry. Other Kenyans wrote to me who said, okay, we agree with your suspension, but we have a lot of these products in our warehouses. And we have taken loans, we have invested, so can we just export the one which is in the warehouse? And I told them to write to me officially. And they have written to me, we are struggling to grow and plant, 15 billion in the next 10 years, and we have people who are cutting trees. And from information I got, they were doing this in Uganda, they were doing this in Tanzania, and they were banned. So I want to assure you that Kenya Forest Service, who are the custodian of the permit, they are not issuing any permit since August. Apart from those and the warehouses have been visited, the quantity have been counted, and they were given for that consignment in the warehouse. That I have no problem. But let them establish the factories here in Kenya, where we can create jobs, where we can have, they can pay taxes, where they can contribute to the economy. If anybody in Kenya Forest Service issues a permit after my suspension, apart from the companies I will give you and the quantity, who we found the items in their warehouses, then they will have to explain.
While the government works through the legal frameworks to widen the benefits from exploiting young eucalyptus trees, carefully projects wood products and honey shortages in the coming days. Bridget, Ghana, NTV.
Replace them with indigenous.
And that report by Bridget Ghana.